And yes, next week, it's hard to believe, but 1 week from now, we will be in Nashville covering the Big Machine Music City Grand Prix. Use that promo code. I want to see you there. Support Oval Racing, support an IndyCar season finale on the Oval tracks because it's going to be awesome. And there was some more breaking news about Nashville today that we're going to get to and talk about real quick. And that is that IndyCar has announced that they are going to have alternate tires available to the teams at the Nashville Superspeedway. So much like on a road or street course, you're going to see the harder black walls tires and the softer red wall tires. And it's certainly a curveball. There's no doubt about that. And it's going to add an element of unpredictability to this race that I think a lot of us weren't necessarily expecting to see going into it. So who knows what's going to happen? And I think that's going to be the big storyline going into Nashville as a championship finale between Will Power and Alex Palou is who is going to be able to manage all of these variables the best. I mean, you're going to have to adapt. It's something that has only been done once before. They did it at Gateway last year. I think if Firestone brings a soft enough compound with that red tire that kind of contrasts with potentially more durability from the harder compound, I think you're really going to see an interesting strategy battle. It will induce some passing because you'll obviously have cars on different grip levels depending on what strategy they're running. So I think it could be a very compelling race, but it is going to be a lot of unknowns. Again, this is a track that IndyCar hasn't raced on since 2008. So it's an unknown, but that's why we run the race. And I hope to see you all there in Nashville. So there's a pretty big disconnect right now, it has to be said, with, in particular, because he's been the one saying all the quotes, IndyCar CEO Mark Miles and the fans. I think that is abundantly clear after the comments that surfaced last week about Pato Award and the potentiality of running a race in Mexico City. Now, I briefly commented on that in my Saturday video from the Milwaukee Mile, and we'll kind of go into more detail on that particular subject as this video goes on. But Mark Miles did walk those comments back. It's important to say that because I think that the backlash was so loud and so overwhelming that correctly, Penske Entertainment and IndyCar realized that they needed to not let that be the controlling narrative. And it's also important to note that this article that surfaced today many of the quotes come from the same conversation that Mark Miles had with a very select few media members. This particular article comes from Nathan Brown of the IndyStar. Will be linked in the description if you would like to go read it yourself, and I would encourage you to do so because I'm only going to hit some of the high points in the article, and there's a lot more details in the article that I think are worth checking out, but not necessarily things that I can really expand on or discuss. It's a lot of just, specifics or maybe like hypotheticals about international races. And as you'll find out in this video, I don't have the highest opinion of an international series for IndyCar. I think international races are important, but there's some things that make me question whether or not something like an international series will ever happen. So here's the thing. Because this conversation did take place in the same interview that Mark Miles said the things that he said about Mexico City and Pato, there's a chance that these quotes are going to be nullified by some sort of a statement at some point by Mark Miles and Penske Entertainment. So I think it's important to say that. I'm trying to give the most charitable interpretation here. This could be an opinion that is, we'll put it this way, changing rapidly based on the feedback that some of these quotes are receiving. But for the purposes right now, we're going to read these quotes and we're going to react to them as though they are the current opinion of IndyCar CEO Mark Miles. And if that opinion does indeed change, we'll correct the record. But one of the major topics that was brought up, obviously, with the discussion that surrounded and has been surrounding the idea of a Mexico City race for the better part of a week in the IndyCar sphere. There was also talk about the 2026 schedule and specifically adding races to next year's calendar, and specifically those being street races. That's something that Mark Miles has talked about before. This is a stated goal of his. It's not new information. Here's some new information that I understand, because I spoke to someone this weekend who mentioned kind of offhandedly to me that there was a new street race coming, and it was going to be announced very soon, within like the next month or two, maybe even sooner than that. And it goes into some detail in this article about specifically what that market is. And we'll talk about it here in a second. But the most important quote in this article, and the one that's being discussed the most, is one that was kind of when, my interpretation of the article is that when the street courses and adding to the schedule in 2026 was brought up, specifically one of the journalists, although it's not named here, I suspect it was Jenna Fryer of the Associated Press, asked about NASCAR losing a date at Richmond. And Mark Miles had this to say, and this is a direct quote from Nathan Brown's article: "We're not going back to places like Richmond. You've got to get your head out of the old us. I don't want to go to places that we've been. I think I'm winning that battle. We recently had a conversation where someone said they want us back at Watkins Glen. And then instantly someone said, oh yeah, that's great. No bleeping way. We've got to quit being what we've been. We've got to show some innovation. So no, this isn't one," meaning street courses or races, "that we've been to." Okay. There's a lot to break down here. A lot to break down. First of all, Richmond was on the schedule in 2020. They were going back there. Then obviously 2020 happened, and Richmond just never happened. So they've already been back to that well, although they didn't actually go there. The quote that says, "You've got to get your head out of the old us." So, and again, this quote was given on Friday of Milwaukee. So there was some uncertainty about going back to the well in terms of IndyCar. Would the fans support things that the fans have been asking for? I think it was a legitimate question. But I think unquestionably, after Milwaukee, I think that, and again, I got to, and kind of by happenstance, I got to spend more time speaking with and interacting with higher ups at Penske Entertainment at the Milwaukee weekend than I ever have before. And the impression that I got from each one of them was that they were impressed by what they saw, surprised even, I would say, in some cases. What you, the fans, did at Milwaukee was unbelievable, exceeded their expectations, and I think made a statement about the direction that you want to see the series go in. And some of it, not all of it, because there are areas where IndyCar has to move forward, has to leave the past behind. But there are some elements of the past that either need to stick around or come back. So this idea of getting your head out of the old us, when in the same interview, Mark Miles talked specifically, and again, he walked these comments back, but I think it's important for context, talked about how much more popular Adrian Fernandez was in the 90s versus Pato O'Ward now. Is it a news flash that the old stuff, old IndyCar, was more popular than current IndyCar? I don't think that's a news flash, okay? I think that the answer, or when you say something like that, especially if you're the CEO of the company, the next question shouldn't be, well, our star isn't as big as this other star from the same country 20 years ago. The question should be why and how can we get him there? If indeed Adrian Fernandez was more popular than Pato O'Ward, which I'm not entirely convinced that's true. But while I agree within to a certain extent that you do need to get your head out of the old when talking about IndyCar. You can't be totally tied to the past. But I think you need to look at the things that did work in the past and take those into the future and discard the things that didn't work in the past and leave them in the past. I think that's a logical way of going about it. So to just come out and say the next part of this, which is I don't want to go to places that we've been, and I think I'm winning that battle. First of all, that quote's it's a pretty tough quote. Because quite frankly, again, what we saw at Milwaukee contradicts this, which is, Mark's saying he doesn't want to go back to the well. He doesn't want to go to places that he's been, specifically mentioning Richmond and Watkins Glen. But he said this on a weekend where they went back to somewhere that they have been, and that somewhere produced 2 impressive days of crowds. Good merch sales, high spirits in the fan base, with the teams, with the media, with the executives. Who wasn't happy with what you saw in Milwaukee? I'd like to meet you. I'd like you to explain what you didn't like. Because I thought everything about that weekend was fan-freaking-tastic for the sport. And you went back to something that worked. You went back to an old facility that the people have been asking for, and it paid off. Did it pay off in huge amount of money? I don't know. I don't control their books. But in terms of goodwill, something that IndyCar has been severely lacking in recently, weekends like the Milwaukee weekend, I would say you can't put a price tag on. They're exactly what your sport needs. So to disregard places like Richmond and Watkins Glen, especially, they had this conversation apparently that someone wanted them back at Watkins Glen, and he said, no effing way. What? That kind of thinking is very dangerous. We've got to quit being what we've been. Well, I would agree with that statement. I would, because I do think you have to. You would be, and I do agree with Mark here. I think you would be crazy to be happy with what IndyCar currently is. I think there's a lot of room to grow. I think there's a lot of things that they can be doing differently. But I think there's there's a lot of disconnect here in understanding exactly what the fans want IndyCar to be and what it seems like the CEO wants IndyCar to be. Follows that up by saying we have to show some innovation. Well, I think you and the fans are on the same page on that one, but I think you're thinking differently. I think the fans would like to see innovative cars on traditional tracks, and you want to see the same cars on innovative tracks or innovative markets. So I think there are very different thought processes and interpretations of what innovation is. Yeah, I would agree with that statement. I think I want to see, if you were asking me, innovative cars on traditional circuits. That's the innovation that I want to see in IndyCar. So no, this isn't one we've been talking to. So let's talk about this street course that supposedly is coming. There have been a couple that have been rumored for a very long time. I think I've mentioned them before. Denver and a street race in Texas. Now, sometimes you hear San Antonio, sometimes you hear Dallas. The specific name that was brought up in the IndyStar article, so we'll roll with it, is Dallas. Specifically, Nathan Brown does the math to say that the proposed dates early in the season after St. Pete wouldn't be weather-wise right to run in Denver. So here's the biggest issue, and I quote tweeted my boy Kyle. about this, because he was talking about, well, the Dallas street race will be hot, and it'll be hard to actually put together a good looking track in Dallas. And here's my issue with Dallas is that Texas Motor Speedway is right there. Like, we were just in this market. Like, the fans, I think if you polled the fans and you said, okay, what do you want? Do you want a Dallas street race, or do you want a race at Texas Motor Speedway? I think I know what the answer would be. I know what my answer would be. And it ain't a street course in Dallas. Now, I think you always need a balance in the schedule. I don't have anything particularly against street courses. Long Beach is one of the greatest racing events I've ever been to. It's unbelievable. St. Pete has a warm, fuzzy vibe and a special place in my heart. Detroit is an interesting place, although I don't necessarily think the track's all that great. I was impressed with the one year I went to Belle Isle. Nashville was cool, and now we get it on an oval, which is, I would say, even better. But the optics aren't good. If it is indeed Dallas, the optics couldn't be worse, because essentially you are taking the date that just a year ago at this point, 2 years, when we're talking about the potentiality of this being the race after St. Pete. You're going to the same market, but instead of the high-speed oval track, which put on one of the greatest IndyCar races I've ever seen, you're going to a slow, potentially boring, potentially chaotic street course in the same market. Everybody's going to be flying into the same airport, and some people are going to autopilot themselves and drive back to Texas Motor Speedway and go, damn it, I got to go downtown Dallas because I meant to go to the racetrack and I went to our old racetrack. Very, very tone deaf. Very, very tone deaf if it is indeed Dallas. And I do understand NTT based in the U.S. in Dallas, you probably need to be in that market for the title sponsor. But it isn't for the fans. It isn't for the fans. The International Series. I'm going to say something really, really spicy here, and I apologize in advance. I'll put out a retractionary statement 2 days from now. But I don't care. Like, this idea of an International Series has been talked about so much that make an announcement or don't talk about it anymore. Because I just, like, we can talk about Argentina, talk about Mexico, we can talk about Japan, we can talk about Australia, and I will talk about Australia in a second. But until you get something announced, I don't want to hear about it anymore. Just don't want to hear about it anymore. You get it done? Great. Let's do it. Let's get excited. I'll get behind it. But not if you're not going to announce anything. And this is the one thing that, and this just was the damnedest quote I've ever heard. And it really just, I almost want to let it speak for itself, but I will comment on it really quick. There was a discussion near the end of the article about specifically that IndyCar had held talks with Adelaide, which to me perked my ears up because Adelaide's a great street circuit. The article talks about potentially pairing that up with a supercars event. I think all of that just sounds fan-freaking-tastic to me. Absolutely the right thought. Absolutely the right idea. I love that idea for an international event. But then Mark gave this quote, which my jaw about hit the floor. Because, and I get it, I do appreciate that the CEO wants to be rah-rah about the series that he controls. I think that is a good thing. But you have to pick your battles. And you can't be throwing Richmond, Watkins Glen, and Pato O'Ward under the bus in a single interview. And you certainly can't say this. Supercars was quite confident they'd have a huge crowd. And we'd probably outdraw Supercars, said Mark Miles. Now, I could understand if you were someone disconnected from the sport and you only went to the Indy 500 and you said, this is the biggest event in the world. If we went to Australia, it would be huge. It would be bigger than any racing they have there. But if you're the CEO of a racing company, you should probably understand, and I'm being very harsh here, but this is tough, man. You can't say something like this. because especially if you want to partner with supercars, maybe don't crap where they eat. Supercars in Australia and that area of the world is NASCAR. I've talked to drivers from New Zealand before, and it's second to rugby. There's rugby, and then there's supercars. Those are two big sports, okay? Saying that quote about supercars, especially racing with them in Australia on the same weekend, and then saying that you would outdraw supercars, which would be like saying, yeah, we're gonna go to the Daytona 500 and we're gonna outdraw NASCAR, or we're gonna go to Circuit of the Americas and we're gonna outdraw Formula One on the same weekend. No. That'd be like IMSA saying, we're going to race on Indy 500 weekend. Yeah, we think we're going to get about 500,000 people. We're going to outdraw the Indy 500. No. No, that's just somehow some wire got crossed there, surely. You can't say so. You just can't say something like that. Just seems to be, it makes someone look like they don't understand the global motorsports arena to say something like that. Because again, totally right idea. To have something be successful in Australia, much like if you want something to be successful in Mexico, you need Pato Award. And I think to be successful as an auto racing product, and particularly an international event in Australia, that is completely the right idea to go to a tradition. Again, guess what? Guess what Adelaide is? It's a traditional event, a one that the fans love, and one that continued after Formula One abandoned it because the fans liked Adelaide so much that they kept coming back no matter what the series was that was racing there. But in particular, the Australian supercars, that's a huge series, and it's completely the right idea to partner with them to put on an event. Completely the right idea. But it's a total misunderstanding that IndyCar would be the draw there, the number one main draw. You are adding to that event and making it big, and maybe this is the most charitable interpretation of this quote that I can say, is that they would outdraw just supercars. If you said it's a supercars IndyCar doubleheader, yes, more people are going to buy tickets to that, and maybe that's specifically what Mark Miles meant. But the way it is written in the article, the way the quote is put in that article, that's not what it sounds like to me. Again, I'm just reading. My reading comprehension skills have been, whatever in the past. Just ask my first grade teacher. But yeah, there's some tough stuff in this article, and there is a disconnect right now because it does feel like the series and the fans want totally different things, and it doesn't seem like they're on the same page about anything. Quick shout out to my pal Steve Zocchi, who gave me this review copy of Fendered Fury. It's the story of the USAC stock car division, which is really interesting. Anything kind of 70s, 80s, 60s USAC is really, really cool. I've been thumbing through the book. It's essentially the northern NASCAR that never was. And it's really cool to read about the great drivers of that era, the great cars of that era, and just kind of to think about the alternate history where USAC continued to be a dominant force in American auto racing. So definitely check that out if you're interested in history. And I certainly am. I love reading books, despite my reading comprehension not always being the best. So certainly going to be a lot of comments on this one. Let me know what you think if you haven't already, and subscribe for more IndyCar content. We'll see you in the next video.